Hello! In this video we will now explain the workspace that you are using when creating your content with Ventuz. This covers the structure and handling of the assets in your Ventuz projects and the user interface. When creating a new Ventuz project on a freshly installed system, you will now see the design view of the Ventuz designer. Here you have a very simple view of your current scene, only consisting of the rendered image and your layer structure. As learned in the last tutorial, a Ventuz scene basically consists of many layers. Every layer, be it a 2D layer, 3D layer, scene or group layer, provides a texture that will be blended together from top to bottom. You can uncollapse the properties of each layer by right-clicking on it or left-clicking on the arrow to the left of the layer. You can change everything that is layer related. You can change the blending mode, which are named similar to those in other 2D compositing software. You can also change the opacity and add a mask to the texture of the layer. Next, you can change the layout of the layer, and you can add effects like a blur or color grading to it. Effects can be masked as well, and also organized in groups to change the masking and blending for several effects at one point. Additionally, every layer type has some type-specific properties. A movie layer can define which movie to play and has several options to control the clip, while a solid color layer can define which color to show. Once 2D compositing is not enough for you and you want to start working in 3D space, or you need to add some data bindings and logic to your layers, you will need to change to one of the other layouts of the designer. The easiest one being the logic view. You can change the view on the top right of the designer window. Just click on logic and you can see three new windows pop up named Hierarchy, Content and Properties. In the Properties window you can already see the same properties of the layers once you click one of them. The Property window shows the properties of the currently selected elements in the scene, generally named nodes. Every node has a certain number of inputs and outputs. Currently you can only see the inputs. If you click these buttons up here, you can change the view of that and also see the outputs. Outputs can be handled as the results of the nodes, like in this case the resolution of a layer. This can be again used to be bound to the inputs of other nodes, explained in a later tutorial. The second window is the content editor, in which you can also see the currently selected layers. This window shows the network of the logic on the current level of the scene. Currently we are on the layer level, as can be seen in the bottom left corner of the content editor. When going inside a layer by clicking the pencil of the layer or using the middle mouse button, you can see that this small text disappeared. Now we are inside a 2D movie clip layer. Here you can see the layer's root node that gets its texture from this movie clip node. The movie clip node is a content node that can only be placed inside the content container and does nothing much more than providing a texture by playing out a movie file. Content nodes in general only generate output properties based on their inputs that can then be used as inputs of other nodes again. This way the texture output is used as an input for the layer root node. The binding is represented by the arrow between the nodes. Now we jump into the 3D layer. Neither on the layer level nor inside 2D layers you can work with a hierarchy, but only in 3D layers. The hierarchy is a representation of a 3D scene that the Ventuz render engine will rasterize in order to blend it together with the other layers of your scene. Here you can, for example, place geometries, move them with the help of axes, or color them with materials. Every hierarchy node can be viewed inside the content container by selecting them. Again, hierarchy nodes have inputs and outputs that can be bound to each other. How exactly to work with the different types of nodes will be covered in the tutorial after this one. So much for the logic view. Let's jump to the Animate View. Here we added just another window, the animation editor. In here you can edit the keyframe animations of your scene. How exactly that works is a topic on its own and will be explained in a later tutorial as well. When we jump to the data view, the animation editor disappears again, and in exchange we can see the scene data and project data windows. In the scene data you can add so-called data channels. Those can be bound to the properties of the nodes anywhere in the current scene, regardless of where they are exactly. So it does not matter anymore if they are on layer level or inside a layer. The project data works similar to the scene data. The data channels here work for the whole project instead of only the scene. The main purpose of scene and project data is making certain properties in your project or single scenes accessible from outside. This way you can communicate with other programs from inside Ventuz or vice versa. The director is one example for an application that uses this technique. Since this does not regard the designer in general and is a very wide topic, it will not be covered in this series. Lastly, you can access the toolbox to place nodes in each of the 3 node editors. The toolbox can be opened either by pressing Shift plus F6 or by ticking the according option in the View menu. Here you can see all different categories of the nodes like world, interaction, geometry or logic. Every node is placed in one of these and you can drag and drop them from here to the according node editor. Instead of using that toolbox, you can use the fast toolbox, which can be accessed by clicking in one of the editors and pressing space. Here you can see all of the categories and can drag and drop nodes from one of them as well. You can also change the fast toolbox to an alphabetic one so that you can search for nodes directly instead of browsing for them in the different categories. This comes in handy once you know which nodes exist and you know which nodes you want to use. So much for the different views of the designer. Lastly, we can have a look at the menu bar. Up here you can see the open scenes and the icon of your current project and its name. Clicking on the icon will open up the project settings. Here you can change the name, category, author and so on of your project. Additionally, you can change the security settings of your project. You can add dongle serial numbers to a whitelist so that only designers using that specific serial number are allowed to open the scenes of the project and the designer. Also, you can change the project-specific options regarding the interaction, the rendered format and font, and emoji presets. Lastly, you can define one of your scenes as a layout scene that will be loaded as soon as the project is opened and stays on screen throughout the whole show. This can be used to affect how other loaded scenes will be displayed in the presentation. When clicking on the project name, you can also change the open project, exit Ventuz and also enter project maintenance. Here you can tidy up and archive your project. In the scene menu, you can create, open, save and close your scenes, as well as exporting them as scene archives or presentations. And you can open the scene statistics, which gives a good overview of how big your scene is, of which nodes it consists, how many resources it uses on your machine, and which assets of the project it uses. Also, you can see a list of issues with the nodes you have placed in your scene. In this menu, you can also change autosave and load options. Whether an open scene dialog should be shown while opening a project, a blank scene should be loaded when no scene was opened, and whether or not to import assets automatically when opening them in a file dialog. Here you can also set up automatic backups and the number of backed up scenes when you hit the Save button. You may also check whether the scene is compatible with an older version of Ventuz 5. In the Edit menu, you cut, copy, paste, delete or duplicate your selection inside one of the editors. And you can use a Find and Replace dialog to search for specific parts of your scene or rename them. Lastly, in the View dialog, you can bring up all windows that are not currently on screen or hide them again. You are able to drag and drop each window around to undock and use it as a floating window or redock it to any place in the designer window. The changes to the window layout will be saved per view and per project. So for each project you have your own designer layout. Additionally, you can set the current workspace as the default workspace in the View menu. Here you can also reset the workspace to the default or the factory settings. Lastly, you can export your workspace to an XML file and take it with you or to other machines and import it there. This way you can have your own personalized Ventuz workspace. Just below the View buttons, you can see options for the renderer. You can pick a color and copy it to the clipboard. You can switch wireframe view on and off, show the performance statistics of the Ventuz runtime, show diagnostics of the touch input, show bounding boxes of the selection, show the output's alpha value per pixel, switch to full screen, turn in renderer edit mode on and off, which will enable the transformation gizmo on selected objects and also the free flight camera. You can show or hide non-rendered objects like cameras or lights, and you can change the mode of the transformation gizmo. Lastly, you can take screenshots of your scene and save it in a file or copy it to the clipboard, and you can even render the output to an output video. This is a rough orientation of the designer user interface. If you need more information on specific parts of it, you can find separate user manual pages for each of the windows and elements. So much for the user interface. Now we will have a look at how Ventuz structures your workflow. First of all, you already learned that the content you will create is organized in projects. Each project can have a number of scenes that consist of several layers, hierarchies, and content node networks. You can create one or more presentations of these that can be started with a Ventuz runtime, or you can run the whole project in the runtime to control which scenes to show and how with a control application like the Ventuz Director. Each Ventuz project holds all assets it needs in one of the subdirectories. This means that if you use an asset in more than one project, you will have it on your hard drive several times. This takes up more space on your computer, but it makes the import, export, exchange, and teamwork issues a lot easier, because you do not have references all over your computer, but only in this directory. Whenever you want to use an asset that is outside your project, you can decide whether to import it or only create a reference to the original location. This is it for the workflow in general in Ventuz. The more detailed flows really depend on what you want to achieve with the software. Next, let us jump into the structure of the assets in the Ventuz project and the most important data pools. Each pool has its respective folder in your project's directory. Archives holds all compressed archives of either single scenes or the whole project that can then be imported on other machines with all the needed scenes and assets. Assets is used by the Ventuz Director and holds all images, movies, data files and the like that you want to use during the running director-controlled show, but not in your design process. This keeps the project from the designer side very clean, but also the operator of the director does not need to distinguish between the dynamic assets he can use for the director show and the design assets that were used in the project. Audio has all audio files. WAV files are stored in sounds. Texts in Ventuz can either use installed system fonts or reference fonts inside your project if you do not want to make sure that the used fonts are installed on all production machines. Geometries contains all imported 3D meshes as VZM files, the Ventuz internal 3D file format. Images has all images despite DDS textures, which are stored inside the textures folder. Movies has all imported movie files. Presentations is the default folder for all exported presentations of the project. In the repository folder you can find your project repositories, in which you can save reusable elements of your project, and use them throughout all your scenes. Finally, all your scenes will be saved in the scenes folder, and their backup files are stored in scenes.revisions. This is it about the basic project structure in Ventuz, and closes the tutorial about your new workspace in Ventuz. In the next tutorial we will go one step further and start to work with the nodes in the hierarchy, content and layer editors.